This is a story that taught me one of the most unsettling lessons in life. You can spend years believing you understand someone. You can laugh with them, trust them, share memories with them. You can think you know exactly what kind of person they are. But the truth is, you never truly know what someone is capable of when their emotions, fears, or darker sides begin to surface. Sometimes the people closest to you can still surprise you in the most terrifying ways. This happened around 4 or 5 years ago. At the time, life had started to feel exhausting. The daily routine was wearing me and my girlfriend Stacy down. Work bills, responsibilities. The constant pressure of normal life was becoming overwhelming and we desperately needed a break. One night, Stacy suggested something that immediately caught my attention. She wanted us to rent a cabin somewhere in the woods. Just disappear for a few days. No stress, no distractions. Just a quiet place where we could relax, enjoy each other's company, and forget about everything waiting for us back home. I loved the idea. The only problem was money. I was not exactly living comfortably at the time, and a private cabin getaway was not something I could easily afford. That was when Stacy suggested bringing another couple. My best friend Randy and his girlfriend were already close with us, so she thought it would actually make the trip better. We could split the cost. We could all hang out together. It would feel like a couple's vacation instead of just a random weekend away. Honestly, I thought it was a great idea. When I called Randy and mentioned it, he agreed almost instantly. He was excited. We started planning everything. Since the trip was happening during the middle of winter, we wanted the perfect cabin. Something warm, something comfortable, something with a fireplace where we could sit at night while snow surrounded us outside. Stacy found a place that looked exactly like what we wanted. We booked it for the end of the month. For the next few weeks, we were excited. We planned meals. We talked about games we would bring. We imagined relaxing evenings by the fire. Everything seemed perfect. Until less than a week before the trip, Randy and his girlfriend broke up, and it was not a peaceful breakup. It happened suddenly. It ended badly. Stacy and I immediately had a problem. We knew Randy had already paid his share, but now he was not going. It did not feel right making him pay for a trip he would not even experience. At the same time, we honestly did not have enough money to cover his half ourselves. So I called him. I expected him to be upset. I expected him to want his money back. Instead, he surprised me. He told me not to worry about it. I offered multiple times to return the money. I told him I did not feel comfortable with him paying for something he was not part of, but he refused. He insisted that Stacy and I should still go. He told me to treat it as a romantic getaway. When I told Stacy, she was actually excited. The stress disappeared. We started looking forward to the trip again. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then, just a few days before we were supposed to leave, Randy called me with unexpected news. He had found someone else to come with us. A new girlfriend. I immediately felt uneasy. I told him I was not sure that was a good idea. When Stacy heard about it, she agreed. It was nothing personal. We just knew almost nothing about this woman. This was not a dinner. This was not a casual night out. We were going away into the middle of the woods with someone we had never met. I tried explaining that traveling with someone is different from casually hanging out with them. You learn a lot about a person when you are away from home. You see how they handle stress, how they react when things do not go their way. And we knew absolutely nothing about her. But Randy kept asking. He promised she was great. He said we would love her. Then he offered to cover my entire portion of the trip if we let her come. Eventually I gave in. Stacy and I were still uncomfortable, but we decided to make the best of it. We told ourselves we were probably overthinking everything. Maybe she would be fun. Maybe this would turn into a great memory. Looking back now, I wish we had trusted our instincts. The weekend finally arrived. The four of us packed into my truck and drove toward the cabin. That was when Randy introduced us to Lucy. At first glance, she seemed completely harmless. She was sweet, quiet, almost shy. Stacy and I are naturally outgoing people. We joke around. We talk a lot. We can be loud without realizing it. During the drive, we tried our best to include Lucy in conversations. We asked questions. We tried getting to know her, but she barely spoke. By the time we arrived at the cabin, I realized something strange. I had spent hours sitting beside this woman, and I still barely knew what her voice sounded like. When we arrived, everything seemed fine. We unpacked, started a fire, relaxed around the fireplace. For a while, it actually felt like the trip might work out. Stacy and I love playing card games, especially Uno. It is simple, easy, something we can play anywhere. So later that evening, Stacy suggested we play. Everyone agreed. Even Lucy seemed to slowly become more comfortable. She laughed a little. She joined the conversation. For the first time, it felt like maybe she was opening up. Then, came the first warning sign. During the game, Stacy called Uno. She only had one card left. That was when Lucy looked at her, and something changed. The quiet, reserved woman sitting across from us suddenly disappeared. Her expression hardened. Her voice changed. And with a level of anger that shocked everyone, she accused Stacy of cheating. At first, we thought she was joking. We laughed. We assumed she was just being dramatic for fun, but our laughter made everything worse. Lucy snapped. She started raising her voice. She insisted Stacy had cheated. She became completely convinced that there was no possible way Stacy could have reached one card without breaking the rules. The entire room changed. It was no longer playful. It was uncomfortable. Everyone was confused. Even if Stacy had actually been cheating, which she was, not the reaction was completely unreasonable. She was screaming about a card game with people she had just met. Randy tried calming her down. That only seemed to frustrate her more. Finally, she threw her cards down and stormed out of the room. The silence afterward was unbelievable. Randy apologized. We tried laughing it off. We told ourselves maybe she was just stressed. Maybe it was a bad moment. Maybe there was an explanation. But that was only the beginning. Later that night, Stacy cooked dinner. And the strangest part was that Lucy acted completely normal again. Almost like the Uno incident never happened. Like she had not just exploded minutes earlier. That was the second warning sign. During dinner, Lucy began sharing extremely personal details about her relationship with Randy. Things that should have stayed private. Things you do not casually tell people you barely know. The kind of information that makes everyone at the table uncomfortable. I could tell Randy was embarrassed. I tried making jokes. I tried changing the subject. Anything to move the conversation somewhere else. Eventually, she stopped. The rest of the night was quiet. Later, we went to bed. I thought maybe the worst part of the trip was behind us. I was wrong. Sometime in the middle of the night, Stacy suddenly woke me up. She whispered for me to listen. At first, I did not understand. Then I heard it. Voices. Randy and Lucy were arguing. The bedrooms were on opposite sides of the cabin and our door was closed, so I could not hear every word. But I did not need to. The tone told me everything. They were fighting. A serious fight. There was anger. Frustration. Something was clearly wrong. Stacy and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to make Randy feel worse, so we pretended we heard nothing. We decided we would not bring it up the next day. Morning came. The day was strangely quiet. Randy seemed distant. Lucy barely spoke. The tension was obvious, but nobody addressed it. Then night came, and that was when everything changed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up, and my entire body froze. Because standing over me was Randy. I had no idea how long he had been there. My heart started racing. I immediately asked him what he was doing, but when I looked at his face, I realized something. He was terrified, not angry, not upset, terrified. Then he quietly asked me something I never expected. He asked if he could sleep in our room, and he asked if we could lock the door. I stared at him completely confused, because I had no idea what could have happened to make my best friend afraid to be alone in his own cabin. I asked him one question. What happened? What Randy told me next completely changed the way I looked at the entire situation. Apparently, sometime during the night, he woke up. At first, everything seemed normal. The cabin was silent. The fire had probably burned down. The entire world outside was covered in darkness. Then he opened his eyes and saw Lucy, standing at the foot of the bed, just staring at him, not moving, not saying anything, just watching him sleep. Randy said his first reaction was confusion. He asked her what she was doing. For a moment, she did not answer. Then she casually shrugged and said something that still makes my skin crawl. She told him she was watching him sleep, just in case. Those two words bothered him more than anything else. Just in case of what? He said they stood there staring at each other for several seconds. Neither of them moved. Then, without explaining herself, Lucy simply turned around and walked out of the bedroom. Randy assumed she was going back to sleep, but several minutes passed. Then, several more. She never came back. That was when he started feeling uneasy. He got out of bed and quietly went to check on her. He wanted to make sure she was okay. Maybe she was upset. Maybe something was wrong. But when he looked toward her side of the bed, he noticed something strange. Something that immediately made his stomach drop. He slowly lifted the blanket, and there it was. A large knife sitting on the bed, right where she had been sleeping. At that moment, every instinct in his body told him something was wrong. He did not wake her. He did not confront her. He did not ask questions. He simply backed away. Then he made the decision to come to our room. Randy quietly moved through the dark cabin. Every step felt dangerous. He was trying not to make a sound, trying not to let Lucy know he was awake. But when he reached the living room, he heard something, a sound that made the entire situation even stranger. Lucy was humming, softly, almost happily. She was walking around the cabin like she was completely unaware of everything happening. Randy described it as looking almost like sleepwalking, but different, wrong, like someone who was awake physically but not mentally there. She moved around slowly, almost like she was dancing. Then she started getting closer to our bedroom, and that was when the floor betrayed him. A small creak, barely noticeable, but enough. Lucy stopped humming. The entire cabin went silent. Then she slowly turned toward him. Randy said she did not look directly at him. It was more like she was looking in his direction, and in a voice that sounded completely different from the woman we met earlier, she said, "I see you." Those words still give me chills, because Randy said there was something unsettling about the way she said it. Not angry, not surprised. Almost like she had known he was there the entire time. Then, just as quickly as it started, she turned away. She began humming again, and continued walking through the dark cabin, like nothing happened. That was the moment Randy entered our room and locked the door. I was trying to process everything he had just told me when Stacy woke up. She immediately knew something was wrong. We were miles away from the nearest town, deep in the woods, in the middle of winter, and we had no idea what we were dealing with. Part of us tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe Lucy was sleepwalking. Maybe she was going through emotional issues. Maybe there was some simple reason behind her strange behavior. But there was one problem: the knife. Sleepwalking could explain some things, but it did not explain why a large knife was sitting on her side of the bed. While we were trying to figure out what to do, we could still hear Lucy moving around outside the room, walking, pacing. Every sound made us freeze. Then suddenly, the front door slammed shut. The three of us immediately stopped talking. We slowly opened the bedroom door. The cabin was empty. Lucy was gone. Randy looked out the window, and that was when we saw her, walking into the freezing forest, barely dressed, a simple t-shirt, shorts, no jacket, no shoes suitable for the cold, nothing. She was disappearing into the darkness like she did not even feel the temperature. Randy immediately ran back toward his bedroom. Then we heard him yell, a terrified scream. The knife was gone. The exact knife he had seen on the bed was no longer there. Stacy immediately said we had to go after her. She said we could not leave someone wandering through freezing woods in the middle of the night, especially if she was sleepwalking. But Randy wanted no part of it. He was terrified. I had known Randy my entire life. I had seen him scared before, but never like this. He was completely shaken. He begged Stacy to call for help. A ranger, the police, anyone. But Stacy was already putting on warm clothes. She believed we needed to find Lucy. Before we could decide what to do, the cabin door opened, then closed. Again, everyone became silent. We listened. Footsteps. Slow footsteps. Coming down the hallway. Then we heard it. The humming. Lucy was back. She was walking toward the bedroom she shared with Randy. Still humming. Still acting like nothing was wrong. We stayed locked inside our room for the rest of the night. Nobody slept. Nobody trusted the silence. At exactly 6:0 the morning, we heard something completely normal. Something almost impossible to believe after everything that happened. Lucy was in the kitchen, washing dishes, like she had just woken up after a peaceful night's sleep. We slowly walked out, and she greeted us normally, smiling, calm, almost cheerful, like she had no memory of the night before. For a moment, Stacy and I tried to convince ourselves there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Lucy was just strange. Maybe she had sleepwalking issues. Maybe Randy was still emotionally affected from his recent breakup. After all, he had ended a long relationship only days before this trip. Everything that happened was disturbing, but maybe it could be explained. Randy did not believe that. He was convinced something was seriously wrong, something deeper, something darker. But Stacy immediately dismissed that idea. She went to help Lucy clean the kitchen. I stayed behind with Randy. I tried reassuring him. I tried telling him that everything would be okay. Then, less than 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Randy. The message was simple. "Come to my room. Now, don't tell anyone." I walked over, and what he showed me made my entire body tense. While packing his things, Randy had moved Lucy's bag. When he placed it down, something fell out. A knife. The same knife. The exact one he had seen beside the bed. There was no mistake. It was hers. I could see the fear in Randy's eyes. At that moment, neither of us knew what to think anymore. He quietly placed the knife back inside her bag. Then we waited. We waited for everyone to be ready to leave. The drive home was one of the most uncomfortable drives of my life. Nobody talked much. The entire time I kept thinking about that knife, about Lucy standing over Randy's bed, about the words she said. I see you. Thankfully, we made it home safely. Nobody was hurt. But the questions never went away. Randy completely disappeared from Lucy's life after that weekend. He never contacted her again. And strangely, she never tried contacting him either. No calls. No messages. Nothing. It was like she vanished. Over the years, Stacy occasionally tried searching for Lucy online. She looked everywhere. Social media, public records, anything that could give us answers, but nothing ever came up. No profile, no history, no trace. It was almost like Lucy was not even her real name, like the person we spent that weekend with had completely erased herself. And that is the part that bothers me the most. Because if Lucy was using a fake identity, then who was she? Why did she want to go on that trip? Why did she react with such anger over something as small as a card game? Why was she watching Randy sleep? And most importantly, what was the knife for? I still do not know what happened that weekend. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe there is something we never understood. But one thing is certain. The person we thought we knew was not the person who showed up at that cabin. And sometimes the scariest thing about people is not what they show you. It is what they are hiding. Looking back, I guess the only thing I can be thankful for is that whatever intentions she had, she never acted on them. But that experience changed the way I viewed people forever. Over the last few years, I had slowly separated myself from the rest of the world. I have always been someone who enjoys being alone. I do not hate people, but I have never been the type of person who needs constant company. I have a very small circle of people I truly trust, and outside of that, I usually prefer my own space. A few years ago, that part of my personality became stronger than ever. I was at the peak of my introverted phase. I wanted silence. I wanted distance. I wanted to escape from the constant pressure of everyday interactions. My anxiety around normal conversations and social situations had gotten so intense that I would go out of my way to avoid being around people. And that was when I developed a strange habit. Whenever I had enough money, I would find isolated cabins hidden away from towns and crowded places and spend my weekends completely alone. To some people, that probably sounds strange, maybe even extreme. But at that point in my life, being alone was the only time I truly felt comfortable. No conversations, no expectations, no pressure. Just me, nature, and complete silence. I kept doing this for nearly 2 years. Most weekends followed the same pattern. I would find a remote cabin, spend time hiking, sit outside, read, and enjoy being somewhere where nobody could bother me. But one weekend changed everything. It was supposed to be another peaceful escape. Instead, it became one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. The weekend started normally. I found a secluded cabin about 2 hours away from my home. It was far enough away that I felt disconnected from everything. That was exactly what I wanted. I drove there on Friday evening, unpacked my things, cooked a simple dinner, sat by myself reading for a while, and went to bed early. The next morning, I decided to go hiking. Being outdoors has always been something that calms me. It does not matter if the weather is perfect. It does not matter if it is raining or snowing. There is something about being surrounded by trees and away from civilization that clears my mind. At least that was how I used to feel. While I was hiking through the woods that morning, something changed. I started hearing noises behind me. At first, I ignored them. Branches snapping, twigs breaking, leaves moving. Those are normal sounds in a forest. But something about these sounds felt different. They did not feel random. They felt intentional, like someone was moving through the woods behind me. My mind immediately went to the worst possibility. Someone was following me. Now I know I can be an anxious person. I know my imagination sometimes gets ahead of reality. So I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Every time I heard something, I would turn around. I would scan the trees, look between the branches, search the area around me. But every single time, nothing, nobody, just empty woods. I continued hiking, but the feeling would not go away. That uncomfortable sensation of being watched kept growing stronger. Eventually, I realized I was no longer enjoying myself. I had planned to go much farther, but I decided to turn around. I just wanted to get back to the cabin. The entire purpose of the trip was to relax. Instead, I was spending my time looking over my shoulder. That night, my anxiety from earlier stayed with me. I felt unusually uneasy. Honestly, I just felt sad. I decided to have a drink, then another, and eventually a few more. As the alcohol started taking effect, I felt myself calming down. The fear from the hike slowly faded. The tension disappeared. I tried reading again, but I could not focus. Instead, I turned on some music and just sat there enjoying the quiet night. For a little while, everything felt normal again. Until around 11 p.m. That was when I heard it. A knock. At the door. The sound immediately cut through the music. I turned it off. I sat there for a moment listening. Then I slowly walked toward the front door. The cabin had a heavy wooden door with 2 narrow rectangular windows built into it. I looked outside. Nothing. No person. No movement. Just darkness. I started walking away. Then I heard it again. Another knock. This time I knew I was not imagining it. I walked back to the door, and someone was standing outside. At first, I could barely see him. The darkness outside hid most of his features. I turned on the porch light, and that was when I got my first clear look at him. He was not what I expected. He did not look dangerous. He did not look injured. He did not look like someone who had been wandering through the woods for hours. Actually, he looked the complete opposite. He looked clean, professional, almost like he was heading to a business meeting. He was around 6 feet tall, athletic build, clean-shaven. His hair was neatly slicked back, and he was wearing a suit. A suit. In the middle of the woods, at Unsprezice, 00 at night. Everything about him felt wrong. Not because he looked threatening, because he looked like he belonged somewhere else entirely. I could not understand why someone dressed like that would appear at an isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere. I stayed behind the locked door and asked him if he was okay. I asked what he needed. For several seconds, nothing. Just silence. A strange, uncomfortable pause. It almost seemed like he was processing my words, like he had to think about how to respond. Then he finally spoke. He said he had been driving earlier with his girlfriend. According to him, they got separated somehow. He claimed he had spent hours walking through the woods looking for her. Now he was lost. He asked if he could come inside and use my phone to call for help. On the surface, it sounded like someone who needed assistance, but something about him felt completely wrong. The biggest thing that bothered me was his voice. There was no panic, no urgency, no fear, nothing. This was supposedly a man who had lost his girlfriend in the woods, a man who had been wandering around for hours, but he sounded completely emotionless, almost empty. I told him he needed to step away from the door. I said I would call someone for help. I told him to wait at the end of the driveway. I was willing to help, but I was not letting him inside. He became quiet again. Then he slowly looked around, and in that same calm, lifeless tone, he said something that made my stomach drop. He said he really needed to come inside. He said there was something outside, something that was after him, and if he did not get inside, he was going to be in trouble. Every instinct in my body told me something was very wrong. I told him I was calling the police. I told him he could either wait outside or leave, but he was not entering the cabin. As I walked away to grab my phone, I heard him say something I still remember. He said he needed to hide. Inside the cabin, he was in trouble. He needed somewhere to hide. Then everything changed. I grabbed my phone, and suddenly, he started hitting the door, hard, aggressively. The peaceful cabin that had felt like my escape only moments earlier suddenly felt like a trap. I ran back toward the door and started yelling at him. I shouted for him to leave. I told him the police were coming, but in the middle of my anger, I stopped, because I heard something. The man was laughing. Not nervous laughter, not awkward laughter. A calm, unsettling laugh. The kind of laugh from someone who was enjoying my fear. I slowly looked toward the window, and my entire body froze. His face was pressed against the glass, only inches away from mine. I almost stumbled backward from the shock. I had no idea how he got that close. I had not heard him move. I had not seen him approach. He was simply there, looking at me. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "Come on, Victor. Just open the door already." My blood ran cold, because there was one problem. I had never told him my name. This stranger standing outside my isolated cabin somehow knew exactly who I was. For a few seconds, I could not move. Then instinct took over. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and told them everything. I explained that I was alone at a remote cabin. A strange man was outside. He was trying to get inside, and he knew my name. The moment the call ended, I looked back through the window. Nothing. The man was gone. No footsteps, no movement, no sign that he had ever been there. For the next 15 minutes, I waited for the police, and I never looked away from those windows. I watched the darkness outside, waiting for him to appear again, waiting for movement, waiting for anything, but nothing happened. Finally, a patrol car arrived. Only one officer came. The moment I saw the lights, I rushed to the door. I opened it quickly and let him inside. And for the first time that night, I finally felt like I was not completely alone. I told the officer everything that had happened. The strange man, the knocking, the way he knew my name, the way he looked at me through that window. The officer listened carefully, and I could tell from his expression that he was both concerned and confused. He told me that none of the nearby residents had reported anything unusual. No suspicious activity, no strange people wandering around, no complaints of someone causing problems in the area. He said this was the first call like this he had ever received from that location. The officer was calm and professional. He could clearly see that I was shaken. I was trying to hold myself together, but I was exhausted, terrified, and honestly still couldn't believe what had happened. He suggested that I drive into town and stay at a hotel for the night if I didn't feel safe staying alone at the cabin. I wanted to leave immediately. The only problem was that I had been drinking earlier that night, and I did not feel comfortable getting behind the wheel. I told him I didn't want to risk driving, but I also couldn't imagine spending another night alone in that cabin. Thankfully, the officer was understanding. He offered to drive me into town himself. As we walked toward his patrol car, something caught his attention. I heard him make a strange sound, almost like he had just seen something that didn't make sense. I stopped and asked him what was wrong. He pointed toward my vehicle sitting in the driveway. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw it. My tires were completely flat, not just deflated, damaged. It looked like someone had intentionally cut them. That was the moment I started to break down. Until then, a small part of me was still trying to convince myself that maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe the man was just strange. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. But seeing my tires destroyed changed everything. Someone had been at my cabin. Someone had been close enough to my car to damage it, and I had been completely unaware. The officer did a great job keeping me calm. He told me to focus on what we knew instead of letting my mind spiral into every possible scenario. He drove me to a nearby hotel and stayed with me in the lobby while I contacted my father. I spent that night in the hotel. The next morning, my father came to pick me up, and we worked on arranging a tow truck and figuring out what to do with my vehicle. The owner of the cabin contacted me repeatedly afterward. He apologized over and over. He wanted to know what happened. He wanted to make things right. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. I didn't want an explanation. I didn't want compensation. I just wanted that entire nightmare to be behind me. I didn't even bother asking for a refund. Some people have suggested that the cabin owner might have been involved. Some have even suggested that he could have been the man in the suit, but I don't believe that. The owner had a profile picture online, and the person in that picture looked nothing like the man who showed up at my door that night. I never found out who that man was. I never learned why he knew my name. I never discovered how he found my cabin, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. Even years later, I still get chills thinking about that night. Sometimes I see those strange prism-shaped windows on doors and my stomach immediately drops. I hate knowing that somewhere out there that man could still exist, still walking around, still looking for another opportunity to frighten or hurt someone. The worst part is not knowing what he wanted. That uncertainty is what stays with me. About 6 months ago, something happened that brought me back to thinking about cabins again. My father passed away. I am not telling this story because I want sympathy. The truth is, my relationship with my father was complicated. We were never especially close. He was not a terrible person. He simply struggled to be the father I needed. Even when I was young, I realized I was very different from him. I knew I was not going to become the person he wanted me to become, and deep down I think that bothered him more than he ever admitted. When he passed away, I was surprised to discover that he had left me his cabin in his will. Some of my friends joked that it was my father's final prank on me. Another cabin, another isolated place, another reason to be uncomfortable. But I don't think that was his intention. I think he probably knew I would sell it. And honestly, I think that was exactly what he wanted. After dealing with all the paperwork, I was told that if I wanted to sell the property, I needed to go there first, clean it up, make repairs, prepare it for someone else. I decided to use that as an opportunity to stay there one final time, not because I wanted to, but because, in a strange way, it felt like my goodbye to my father. When I arrived at the cabin, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was horrible. The place smelled like something had died inside. And no, my father did not pass away there. He had not even visited the cabin for almost a year before he died. I searched around, expecting to find some dead animal hidden somewhere, but I couldn't find anything. I think the smell was simply from years of neglect. The next thing I noticed was how unchanged everything looked. It was almost disturbing. The cabin looked exactly the way I remembered it from when I was 10 years old. The same furniture, the same old couches, the same bookshelves, the same layout. It felt like I had stepped backward in time, like the cabin had been frozen for decades. I spent several hours downstairs cleaning. Thankfully, my father had repaired the roof a few years earlier, so that was one major problem I didn't have to worry about. I was going through my checklist, figuring out what needed fixing before selling the place when I started hearing something. Movement. Coming from above me. At first, I ignored it. Old cabins make noises. Wood expands. Animals move around. That was what I told myself. Then I remembered. The attic. Or what my father called the attic. It was not really a proper attic. It was more like a strange combination of storage space and crawl space. A place that seemed like it was never designed properly. At the end of the back hallway was a small pull cord hanging from the ceiling. When you pulled it, a hidden door opened and a folding ladder dropped down. I stood there for a moment looking up into the darkness. I already knew I wasn't going to like what I found. Still, I grabbed the ladder and slowly climbed upward. I prepared myself for the possibility of finding a nest of raccoons, maybe squirrels, maybe some forgotten animal hiding in the darkness. But what greeted me was something worse. The smell. It was stronger than downstairs. Much stronger. The second my head reached the attic opening, the odor hit me so hard that I started coughing. I covered my mouth and looked around, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Boxes everywhere. Old belongings. Trash scattered across the floor. Food wrappers. Empty beer cans. Random garbage piled up in corners. It looked less like storage and more like a place someone had secretly been living in. I knew my father was never the cleanest person, but this was different. This was something I had never seen from him before. Standing there in that dark, filthy attic, surrounded by years of forgotten things, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just uncovered a part of my father's life that he had deliberately kept hidden. I tried cleaning up some of the trash, but I couldn't stay up there for long. The smell was unbearable. It was the kind of odor that seemed to stick to the back of your throat and make every breath uncomfortable. On top of that, I was already exhausted from spending hours cleaning the rest of the cabin. I was not mentally prepared to open every box, sort through years of forgotten belongings, and deal with whatever was hiding in that dark space above me. So I made the decision to leave it for another day. I grabbed as much trash as I could carry, brought it downstairs, and threw it away. I told myself I would deal with the attic in the morning when I had more energy. For the time being, I just wanted to sleep. Not long after that, I changed the sheets on my father's old bed and decided to spend the night in his room. It felt strange sleeping there, being surrounded by his things, being in the same place where he had spent so much time. Even though we had our differences, there was something emotional about being there. Eventually, I fell asleep. But sometime during the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. A sound coming from above me. Rustling. Movement. The same kind of noise I had heard earlier. I laid there in the darkness listening. My first thought was that there had to be some kind of animal problem. Maybe there were creatures living inside the walls. Maybe they were moving around at night. Maybe some of them had died somewhere inside the structure, which would explain the horrible smell throughout the cabin. It was the only explanation that made sense. But then I realized something. The sound wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from directly above me. The attic. The exact place I had already found, filled with trash and a strange, disgusting odor. I tried ignoring it. I told myself it was probably nothing. But after a few minutes, I knew I wasn't going back to sleep, so I got up, covered my nose, and walked toward the back hallway. The cabin was completely silent except for the occasional creaking of old wood beneath my feet. When I reached the attic entrance, I immediately noticed something wrong. The latch was open, the attic door was hanging down, and the folding ladder was extended all the way to the floor. I stood there staring at it. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of unease. But I tried to stay logical. Maybe I had not closed it properly earlier. Maybe the wind had pushed it open. Maybe an animal had knocked it loose. There were plenty of normal explanations. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. Then I looked down, and I saw something on the floor. Another snack wrapper. I just stood there staring at it. I couldn't believe it. More trash. More evidence that someone or something had been up there. I picked it up feeling more annoyed than afraid at that moment. I walked into the kitchen, threw it into the garbage, and angrily closed the lid. I grabbed a bottle of water and went back into the living room. There was no point trying to sleep again. I knew I would just lay there listening to every little sound, so I decided to stay awake until morning. The living room was completely dark. The only source of light was a small lamp sitting on the end table beside the couch. I turned it on. The bulb was weak. It gave off a dim orange glow that barely illuminated the room, but it was enough. Enough to keep me from sitting in complete darkness. I sat down on the couch and started thinking about the cabin, about my father, about the strange connection between him and this place. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Why would my father spend time in that disgusting attic? Why would he go upstairs into that filthy space when he had an entire cabin available? The cabin itself was old and messy, but compared to the attic, it was practically luxurious. It didn't make sense. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, something caught my attention. In the corner of the room near the recliner, I noticed something that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was just a blanket covering an object. Nothing unusual. People leave blankets on furniture all the time. But then I remembered something. I had cleaned that entire downstairs area earlier. Every corner, every piece of furniture. I was certain that blanket had not been there before. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I stood up. I walked toward it, one step at a time. The closer I got, the more uncomfortable I felt. Something about it was wrong. Then I saw it. I stopped immediately. A few feet away from the blanket, barely visible in the weak orange light, was something sticking out from underneath it. A boot. The bottom of a boot. My entire body froze. I couldn't move. I just stared, trying to convince myself that I was seeing something incorrectly, trying to find any reasonable explanation. But the shape was clear. Someone was under that blanket. I slowly stepped backward. My heart started pounding. The cabin that had felt empty and abandoned suddenly felt completely different. For the first time since arriving, I realized something terrifying. I might not have been alone in the cabin at all. I stood there, frozen, staring at the blanket. For a few seconds, I tried desperately to convince myself that there had to be another explanation. Maybe I was tired. Maybe grief and exhaustion were playing tricks on my mind. Maybe the shape I saw wasn't what I thought it was. But then it happened. The blanket moved. Not from the wind. Not from an animal. It shifted slowly, deliberately, like someone underneath it had adjusted their position. My entire body went cold. That was the moment everything finally clicked. The sounds I had been hearing all night weren't coming from squirrels, raccoons, or anything else living in the walls. It wasn't the cabin settling. It wasn't old wood creaking. It was a person. Someone had been moving around above me. Someone had been inside this cabin. As I kept staring, the truth became impossible to ignore. The blanket was rising and falling slightly. A slow, steady movement. Breathing. Someone was lying there, hiding underneath it, only a few feet away from me. I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know how long they had been there. And more importantly, I didn't know what they wanted. I suddenly became aware of how vulnerable I was. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, inside a cabin that belonged to my father, and there was a complete stranger hiding inside it. I didn't want answers anymore. I didn't want to know who was under that blanket. I didn't want to find out what would happen if that person decided to stand up. So I slowly started backing away. I moved as quietly as possible, trying not to make any sudden movements. I made my way into the kitchen, grabbed my phone and my keys, and the second I had everything in my hands, I ran. I didn't grab my belongings. I didn't look back. I just got out. I rushed through the cabin door, sprinted across the driveway, and jumped into my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my keys. I started the engine and immediately put the car into reverse. The driveway felt longer than it ever had before. As I backed away from the cabin, I glanced up toward the building, and that's when I saw him. The door flew open. A man came running out. He looked nothing like I expected. He was dirty, extremely thin. His clothes looked worn and his appearance was almost animal-like, as if he had been surviving out there for a very long time. For one terrifying moment, I thought he was coming after me, but he didn't. He stopped at the entrance of the cabin. He just stood there watching. I didn't wait around to find out what he was thinking. I drove away as fast as I could and immediately called the local police department. I explained everything that happened. The officer I spoke with told me that considering my father had not been staying at the cabin for a long time, it was very possible that someone had simply moved in. A person with nowhere else to go. A person looking for shelter. He said that based on the condition of the attic and the smell I described, the man could have been living there for months, possibly even longer. That actually made sense. My father had not visited the cabin for nearly a year before he passed away. For all that time, nobody had been checking on the property. Nobody would have known someone was inside. By the time the police arrived, the man was already gone. They searched around the area, but they couldn't find him. There was no information about who he was. No name. No history. No explanation for how he ended up there. Even now, I don't know exactly what his intentions were. Part of me believes he never wanted to hurt me. After all, he had plenty of opportunities. He could have attacked me while I was sleeping. He could have confronted me when I first arrived. He could have done something while I was cleaning downstairs. But he didn't. However, that doesn't change how terrifying the situation really was. I had been sleeping inside that cabin, completely unaware that another person was living there. A stranger had been hiding in my father's attic. A stranger who had been surrounded by garbage and darkness waiting in a place I thought was empty. I never stepped inside that cabin again. Not once. I hired someone to completely clean it out without explaining the entire story. Maybe that was unfair. Maybe I should have told them everything. But I couldn't bring myself to go back. They removed everything inside, cleaned out the cabin, and eventually I sold the property exactly as it was. I like to think that whoever owns that cabin now is able to enjoy it the same way my father once did. I hope they find peace there. I hope they create their own memories there. And most importantly, I hope they never discover a hidden visitor waiting above them in the darkness.